Hi everyone and welcome back to Farrand Film, and today I am bringing you the first of two revision videos for this year's GCSE Film Studies exams. This of course is the video that's going to take you through component 1, so paper 1, which this year is on Friday the 8th of May in the afternoon. You can see on the screen all the film choices that are available to you for this paper. So if you're in my class and you're watching this, we are doing Rebel Without a Cause and Ferris Bueller's Day Off for question 1, 2 and 3. It's the timeline in question 4, and then question 5 is on Whiplash for us. For everybody else, it's your US film from 1930 to 1960. So that could be Dracula, could be Singing in the Rain, could be Pillow Talk, could be Invasion of the Body Snatchers, could also be Rebel Without a Cause. Your question 2 is your US film from 1961 to 1990. So Lost Boys, Grease, When Harry Met Sally, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and E.T. Question 3 is your comparative analysis. That's putting both those two films together. Question 4 is your key development timeline, so key events between 1895 and present day. And then question 5 is your specialist writing, which is Juno, The Hurt Locker, Whiplash, Lady Bird, and The Hate You Give. So let's get into it and let's have a look at question 1. So question 1, US film, 1930 to 1960, as I've already said. So Dracula, Singing in the Rain, Pillow Talk, Rebel Without a Cause, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, this first question, similar to question 2, is just about one film. Question 3 is where you need to bring two films together and start comparing them. Now, with this video, and as I do every year, I've gone back over the last few years of looking at the exam paper from the year before. So this year I'm going to be looking at the 2025 paper, which some of you may have already seen, which some of you may have already sat this year as part of your mocks. But it's just a good thing to do to look back and to sort of have a little bit of a debrief about what kind of questions came up on those exams. And I hate to predict, I hate to kind of try and, pin it to a mast and say this is the question that I think is going to come up this year. But I do always try and give some sort of indication of what I think is going to be on the paper, because typically, if you look and you can sort of see on the screen, there's not too much repetition year on year. So if you look at 2021 to 2022, for example, yes, they are both elements of cinematography in those questions, but they are the 2 years where they were very similar, one year after the other. Every other year, so 2023 you've got sound, and then 2024 you go back to cinematography. 25 you go into props and mise en scène. So really thinking about what questions have come up in the past, can we sort of see any patterns, and really try and sort of steer where you're thinking and all that kind of stuff. But as always, it is very good, and it is always my advice to revise generally and not just to focus on one thing, just to try and make sure that you've got all the covers, all the bases covered, as it were. So. So this first question, this year or last year, I should say, 2025, was identify one key prop used in the film that you have studied, briefly explain the importance of the prop, and then explore how props and any other aspects of mise en scène are used in at least one key sequence of your film. Now we're going to focus just on A and B for the time being. So these are what we like to call stepped questions. You must use the element from 1A in 1B. So for example, thinking about Rebel Without a Cause for my students. So we might pick the toy monkey at the beginning of the film. We might pick Plato's knife from just towards the sort of end of the first act. We might pick Plato's gun from the last act. Now, the prop that you mention in 1A needs to be the prop that you still talk about in 1B. And I say this every year, that might seem really, really obvious to say, and it might seem really obvious to say out loud, but sometimes students kind of forget that and they mention a prop in 1A, and then when they move on to 1B, they forget about the prop that they've already mentioned and start talking about something else. They need to carry over here. You need to be talking about the same prop. Now, these are again what we call stepped questions. So they're introducing an element to you in 1A, and then they're asking you to talk more about that same element in 1B. So where it says briefly explain the importance of the prop, that question is worth 4 marks. Now, for that question, I'm going to go through ideally the kind of things that you need to be writing in order for you to achieve 4 marks. Now, it's something that's come up a lot in comments on these videos, in comments on the TikTok videos, about people not necessarily knowing what to do for these shorter answers, that they feel like they've got the structure down for the 10 markers, which again I'm going to come to in a little bit, but it's these shorter ones where they kind of need the help with. So we'll go through that in just a second. And of course, specificity is key. So if you're saying for a prop, for example, if you just say the car, I would be hard pressed as an examiner to give you a mark for that. It might be that the examiners are feeling generous and they are going to give you that mark. But for me personally, if I was marking it, if someone in my class had written that, I'd want specificity around whose car are you talking about or the colour of the car that you're talking about rather than just saying a car. So, one thing that I've not really done before that I thought might be interesting to do is as part of the sort of bundle of resources that are available online to both teachers and to students, you get an exam paper and you get a mark scheme. Now, the mark schemes are really interesting to look at in terms of something that we like to call indicative content. Now, what that means is questions that come up on the paper, but answers that the examiners are expecting to see, or the kind of things that they're expecting to see at this point. So this is the indicative content for that prop question. So they've put on here, candidates need not take an approach specific to one prop, but can deal with the general impact of props used throughout the film. So this is for question 1B, okay? This may incorporate more than one prop, particularly in the 3 mark answers. Candidates may produce answers that are worth more than 3 marks. What is clear is the use, the significance, or the importance of the prop. A 4 mark response may contain 4 points of explanation, 2 exemplified points, or any combination of explanation and exemplification. Now, what I like to sort of say to my students, especially when it comes to 4 mark questions, is talk about 2 things. Talk about, in this case, talk about 2 props and how they are important. Now, I know that that sounds a little bit hypocritical on the thing that I've just mentioned about this being a stepped question, but I think just to bring it back to Rebel, if you were to say Jim's toy monkey and you talk about Jim's toy monkey in B, and then you bring in at the same time Jim's car or Plato's gun or Plato's knife, for instance, that's okay because you're still referring to the toy monkey. If you talk about the toy monkey in 1A, but then in B you start talking about Plato's knife and Plato's gun, I would find that difficult to say and to mark it and say that you are still on track and talking about the importance of this prop in reference to the question. So when it comes to a 4 mark response, you can either go down the route of just talking about that one prop and giving 4 points about that prop, or you can talk about the prop and bring in another one and sort of give a bit more deeper analysis on that question. So I'm going to go through a bit of a model response for you now. So, prop. Now, is it important to a specific character? Okay, so if you're talking about a prop, no matter what film it is, it could be this film, for instance, and again, I keep mentioning Rebel for my students, but it could also be Dracula, it could be Pillow Talk, it could be Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I'm going to forget the other one, Singing in the Rain. Okay, it could be any of the questions that are going to come up on the second, any of the films that are going to come up on the second question. Now, when you're saying why is it important to a specific character, in order for you to have picked a prop that is a key prop, now remember the question says identify a key prop. It's got to be important to a character. It has to be important to a character because otherwise they wouldn't have put it in there. They wouldn't have just thrown that prop in. So again, if I'm thinking of Rebel, I'm thinking of that toy monkey for Jim. I'm thinking of Plato's gun or Plato's knife. I'm thinking of Judy's vanity mirror. Okay, so there are a lot of things that might link to a certain character. You might go for microphones in Singing in the Rain. You know, you might go for this is me trying to pull back something on one of the other films. Let's say Count Dracula's cloak. I've not seen it in ages. Would that be a prop or would that be a costume? Let's not decide that. So, why is it important to a specific character? Why is it important to the film? What does it do to the narrative of the film? Does it add anything to the narrative of the film? If it does, talk about it. If it doesn't, talk about it. Because even at that point, when you say briefly explain the importance of the prop, it might not be that important, and you can mention that as well. What does it mean in the relation to the context of the film? So is it a context-driven thing? So for us, and the way that I've taught Rebel Without a Cause in the past is that when we talk about Jim's toy monkey, it links to the juvenility of his character. It links to this delinquency that is going through and is rife in the 50s, which is a big thing in the context, in that he is arrested for being drunk and disorderly, but actually the first time we see him, he's playing with a toy monkey. So it kind of tells you that actually, while he wants to act mature and seem mature, he's not at that level yet at all. So, if we're going into a bit of a model answer then, now by no means am I saying that this is a perfect answer. This is just me working through it, thinking about a specific prop, saying why it's important to that character, why is it important to the film, and what does it mean in terms of the context. So, the prop of the toy monkey is important to Rebel Without a Cause as it's the first prop that we associate with Jim. Okay? Jim is playing with the toy monkey in the film's opening scene whilst getting arrested for being drunk and disorderly. So what I've done there is I've mentioned why it's important just because we associate it to a character, so that'd get me a mark. I've then said where we maybe see that prop and where we reference it, and again that's going to get me another mark. The prop symbolizes Jim's immature nature, which contradicts the offense that he's been arrested for. So, like I've just mentioned, it symbolizes Jim, his immaturity, but the fact that he's playing with a toy contradicts the fact that he's been arrested for being drunk and disorderly. Being drunk and disorderly immediately connotes this idea that you have to be of a certain age to be arrested for that. Never mind do it. So he's not even of that age, but he's too immature. So then that's why you've got that contradiction between the two. Now, for those of you that have been following my videos and have been watching the TikToks and all that kind of stuff of going through content and structures and things like that, when we come to the 5 markers and the 10 markers and the 15 markers, I mention a structure that I had a class a few years ago lovingly describe it as pie sag, which sounds awful in terms of like peel and petal and all that kind of stuff. But it's basically point, important, scene, audience, genre. Okay. Now, a genre and context. Now, that means you say what you're saying. So the prop of the time monkey is important because of this. You say where it's been seen in the film. So what key sequence, and at that point you're bringing in something that the examiners expect you to be doing in 10 and 15 markers, which is bringing in a key sequence. Say why it's important, say what that means for the audience, and then say what that means in terms of the genre or the context of the film. Now, when you approach 4 markers, do the same thing, but just chop off one of the points. So you can say a point, you can say where it's seen in the film, and you can say why it's important and what it means to the audience. You don't necessarily need to go too deep in terms of the genre or the context, but if you want to, because for instance with this one, like I'm going to in a minute, it's quite important to do that. I'm just going to take out the bit about audience. So all I've done here is I've said my point. So it's important with to Rebel Without a Cause, as it's the first prop that we associate with Jim. It's important because, again, well, we've already said why it's important, but Jim playing with the time monkey in the film's opening scene, so where's it seen? In the opening scene, whilst getting arrested for being drunk and disorderly, the prop symbolizes Jim's immature nature, which contradicts the offense that he's been arrested for. And then this links to the context of the film as the negative juvenile behavior was rife in America in the 1950s. So again, I would argue that would get you 4 marks, okay? That you've gone through and you've said this is why this is important. That not only have you got that sort of where we see it, you've brought in that point of the contradiction and then you've brought in the point of the context as well. Now, the shorter mark questions is something that I've purposely done throughout the rest of this video, and I've purposely done for the second video for paper 2, because rather than necessarily going over the 5 and 10 markers, which are still in the video, but I've done that a lot in the past anyway, and it was the smaller answer questions that I know that, for instance, my class this year are sort of struggling, and that's where they tend to be dropping marks along the way. But actually, it comes to the shorter ones where I think everybody across the board feels like they're not writing enough for those ones. So I've done this in hope that this helps essentially. So when we look at C, so this is your 10 marker. So explore how props and any other aspects of mise-en-scène are used in at least one key sequence from the film that you've studied. Now, I always say this, that when you get a 10 or a 15 marker, you want to divide it by 2, and that's how many paragraphs that you write. So a 10 marker should be 2 paragraphs. A 15 marker should be 3 paragraphs. We're going to come to 15 markers more prominently in the video for paper 2. So for this answer, this is 10 marks, so you should be writing 2 paragraphs. So split your 10 markers into 2. This question naturally splits into 2. So discussing props and then one other aspect of mise-en-scène. Now it's nice, really nice in this sense, that if we're looking at a 10 marker and saying that we need to write 2 paragraphs on it, that if the question naturally allows us to split that answer into two. So it's saying explore how props and any other aspects. So for one paragraph, we know that we need to talk about props. For another paragraph, we know then that we can bring in another aspect of mise-en-scène. So then at that point, we can talk about costumes, we can talk about settings. If we wanted to, we could talk about body language and performance, but arguably, you're going to get more out of talking about costumes and settings at that point. So when we look at a 10 marker and a 10 mark response, so I've just kind of gone through the structure that I like to sort of tell my classes to use, which is your point, your scene, important, audience, genre, and context. Now, this is not a perfect structure in terms of flow of your answer. I have a lot of students who naturally go to this structure but then swap things around. So they might talk about a point that they're going to discuss and then why it's important and then where it's seen, whereas on the screen, it does it the other way around. It's totally up to you, okay? It's just a nice little acronym, I suppose, to try and get you to think about writing enough to hit all five of those marks. My advice again would always be to start with a topic sentence, and the idea of the topic sentence ultimately is to set up the two things that you're going to talk about so that you don't forget. And it's also to reference a key sequence. Now, the question says explicitly any other aspects of mise-en-scene are used in at least one key sequence. Okay. Now, when it comes to any question, 5 marks or above, you need to be talking about a key sequence. And especially for these 10s, these 15s, and when we get to the 20 later on, you need to be talking about a key sequence. You need to be bringing in a scene from the film that references the point that you are making. Now, the terminology of key sequence is something that trips students up every single year, in that some people will look at the wording of that and they'll think to themselves, what is a key sequence? What does that even mean? Key sequence just means key scene from the film. Now, as a teacher, and I'm sure that other teachers who may be watching this or have pointed their students towards this um, can vouch for, we can't show you every single scene in a film all the time. We can't just have lessons where we show you 8 scenes from a film and then we sit and have a chat about them. Okay, we need to pick scenes that we think are important for us to try and analyze with you, for you to try and remember key things. So for me, for Rebel, we do the opening scene, we do the closing scene. So we do when Jim gets arrested and you see the three of them in the police station. We do the ending where Plato gets shot. And we do the family argument on the stairs where you then get the Dutch tilt. Okay. Now, the reason why we do those 3 scenes is because along the way, you're able to pick certain things out. So you have the diegetic sound of Jim saying, "You're tearing me apart" to his parents. So that if there is a sound question, you've then got that piece in your bank ready to use for that question. If there's a cinematography question, you've got the Dutch tilt on the stairs of the family argument scene. If there's a prop question like there is here, you've got the toy monkey, you've got the vanity mirror, you've got Plato's gun. Okay. Now, that isn't to say at all that just because I've explicitly taught you those 3 scenes or shared those 3 scenes or analyzed those 3 scenes, that when you come to a question, if you're answering it and you're in the midst of writing however much you're writing and you go, oh, actually, I know what might be good to talk about here. That knife that Plato uses in the observatory. But Sir didn't take us through that in any lessons that we did. So does that mean that it's a key sequence? Any scene from a film is a key sequence as long as it backs up your point. What the examiners are doing here is they are deliberately testing and assessing your knowledge on being able to state whether a scene is a key scene. Okay? Now, what I mean by that is that if you have said that you're going to talk about props and a specific prop in a key scene for your film, so you say, the prop I'm going to talk about is, let's go back to it, Jim's toy monkey from the beginning of the film, okay? And you say that that's what you're going to talk about. But then all of a sudden, you start talking about the scene where Jim's at home with his parents and his mum's just made a cake and Grandma turns up and says that she's made the cake instead. That then at that point isn't a key sequence because it doesn't reference the toy monkey. If you're talking about the cake, it's a key sequence, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. That any scene in the film can be a key sequence. What they're doing and what the examiners are doing and what the examiners are looking for are for you to be able to say, this thing is really important. And I've found it and I've seen it in this film in this sequence here. Okay? So any sequence, any part of the film can be a key sequence. But I will have told my class three specific scenes to look at. Your teachers will have told you three specific scenes to look at. But that doesn't mean that when you get into the exam, you can't pick from somewhere else if it helps you along the way. Okay? And notice how the question says used in at least one key sequence. So you can talk about two. So, uh, at this point, I'm going to talk about the proper Plato's gun. So I'm just going to read through what's on the screen now. So in that paragraph one, using the structure. So the first point I will discuss is the proper Plato's gun. This is seen at the end of the film when Plato refuses to put the gun down when police surround him. This is important because the gun shows that Plato feels threatened and does not trust the adults around him. This also shows the unpredictability of Plato's character. As the audience, our emotional response to the film becomes heightened because of this unpredictability. This links to the teen drama. Oh, I can't even speak today. This links to the teen drama genre because it shows young people dealing with extreme emotions and reflects the 1950s concerns about teenage crime and youth behavior. Okay? So I would say very straightforward. I've just said, this is Plato's gun. This is where we've seen it. This is why it's important. For the audience, this is what it means, and then I've linked it to the genre or the context. Okay, so if you're able to do that, I would argue that gets you 5 marks. You do it again, that gets you 10 marks, and you're winning. Okay. Now, the just to mention just before I come off the screen, the topic sentence. So just to go back to that. So in Rebel Without a Cause, props and costumes are used to create meaning. Now, the reason why I sort of advise to do that, don't worry if you forget to do it. I have a lot of students who forget to do this. I just don't even do it, just completely disregard it. And again, it's fine. But in my head, that makes a bit more sense if you write that at the top of your answer and you say, I'm going to talk about props and costumes. And then once you've done your props paragraph, you then can go back up and read that you've said that you're going to talk about costumes. And then you remember to then talk about costumes. Okay. Depends on you, depends on what works for you. It might be that you just want to dive straight in. It might be that that just won't work for you. But again, you just got to have a play around with it, find what fits you, what works for you, and then go from there. Okay? So, this is looking back at the last few years of questions. Now, we go all the way back to 2019. This is when these films first appeared, or some of these films first appeared. And that was a mise-en-scène question. 2020, you get genre conventions. 2021, you get cinematography. 2022, editing and cinematography. 23, sound. 24, cinematography. 25, props and mise-en-scène. Now, if you were looking at that and you were looking at a sort of pattern where they've gone mise-en-scène, genre, cinematography, sound, cinematography, mise-en-scène, your gut instinct might be to go, well, they might go back to cinematography then because they seem to have done a bit of a pattern of going cinematography then blah, 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 blah. If I was a betting man, which at this point I'm not, because you'll be able to tell in a minute that I'm not. I think it's gonna go one of three ways. Sound's not come up since 2023, so it could be a sound question. You've not had a character-based question really since I think that 2022 one might have been a character-based one, and you've not had anything based on the genre since 2020. So. I would think that you're either going to get a sound or a genre or a character based question. But again, cinematography is in the back of my mind, which at this point is the reason why I don't say this is my full cert prediction. Okay, I just sort of advise to revise generally, and just pay attention to where past paper questions have come up. The bigger thing to do, and I might do a sort of separate video on this because, spoiler alert, when you get to the paper two video, I'm recording it back to back with this one. But once paper one's happened, I might do just a quick update thing on the questions that came up on paper one because typically, and again, this is where I shoot myself in the foot with this, typically, similar questions don't come up once they've been on paper one on paper two. So if you get a cinematography question for Rebel on paper one, you then probably wouldn't get a cinematography question on paper two. Cinematography is something that I think is going to come up on paper two, for question three, Skyfall question. Um, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, and I could sit here all day and contemplate, and it'd just be the ramblings of a madman, and nobody needs to see that. So that's question one. All right. Moving into question two. So, question two. In 1961 to 1990, I've been on here for 25 minutes, and you know what? Let's ramp things up a little bit. So this is Lost Boys, Grease, When Harry Met Sally, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and E.T. Now this has a little bit more variety across years in terms of questions that have been asked. So you've had character, you've had genre conventions, you've had sound, you've had narrative conventions, you've had cinematography, you've had mise-en-scène. Okay, you've had props and costumes. Editing's never come up for this question. Could it come up this year? Who knows? So, this question last year. So, identify one genre convention used in the film that you've studied, briefly outline why filmmakers use genre conventions, and then explore genre conventions. So, there's a couple of things that we need to do here. Okay. So, first of all, it's a step question. You must reference element 2A in element 2B. Let's talk about genre conventions. Now, genre convention and narrative conventions are two terms that come up in exam papers that make my students in particular, and many, many students I've taught in the past, and many students that I've had conversations with go, what the bloody hell is one of those? Okay. Now, when we say convention, we're talking something that you expect to see. We're talking about something that you expect, something that's typical, something that would only work in that kind of film if we're talking genre convention. Narrative convention, we can talk things like protagonists, antagonists, beginning, middle, end, narrative structures, things like that. Okay. But because we're talking about genre conventions, what we're talking here is the ingredients of a film. Okay. Think of a film like a recipe. And for the recipe to work at the end of it, you need all the different ingredients. You need all the things to come together in order to make that film work. So, for example, in a horror film, you may be expecting to see a haunted house. You may be expected to see, in the case of the Lost Boys, vampires. You may be expecting to see a jump scare, things like that. These are all genre conventions. For Rebel Without the Cause and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, they are teen films. So a genre convention that you might be expected to see in a teen film is a teenager. That would be a genre convention. Okay. Now, question B is a bit mean, and I'm going to come to this now. Okay. So, question two says, briefly outline why filmmakers use genre conventions. Now, the exam board are, and I'm hoping they don't mind me saying this, very, very sneaky for doing this every now and again, where they ask you questions that aren't directly linked to the film that you're studying. They want you to go wide. They want you to go generalized. They want you to talk about cinema in general at this point. Okay. There's a question that comes up every now and again on paper two for the Skyfall question, the aesthetics question, where it says, what does this color typically connote? Okay, what does this color typically mean? All right. Now, when they say the word typically, they're talking about generally, not in the film that you've discussed, which trips a lot of people up. So, for this question, where they've asked you to identify a genre convention in the film that you've studied, and then said, why do filmmakers use genre conventions? They're not asking you to talk about genre conventions in your film. They're asking you to think broadly and widely about why filmmakers use genre conventions in the first place. Okay? So, as we can see from the excerpt of the mark scheme that's on the screen, so candidates may consider this in their response. Conventions, the typical ingredients of a genre film, establishes films as being in a particular genre. Audiences are attracted to seeing films that they know that they're going to like. Audiences expect to see conventions that they are familiar with in a genre film. Producers want films to be easily identified. Conventions establish ease of recognition. Ensure a genre film uses familiar conventions, minimizes commercial risk, and audiences' pleasure is based on their expectations being fulfilled. Now, again, like I did with question one, I'm going to take you through a bit of a model answer for this. So, it's one of those, like I've just mentioned, talk generally questions that trip people up. So, genre conventions are used to support filmmakers, film studios, and the audience. Okay, this is a bit like a topic sentence because I'm basically, with that and opening it up, saying to myself, I need to talk about why they're used for filmmakers. I need to talk about why they're used for film studios, and I need to talk about why they're used for the audience. So, filmmakers, conventions provide a set of rules or ingredients for a particular genre for them to work with or within. For film studios, adhering to film standard conventions minimizes commercial risk, meaning that meaning films that they produce are more likely to make money. So this is the kind of like, so for filmmakers, if they're going making a horror, they know the certain things that they should include in a horror. For film studios, they know that if they need to release a film on October 31st, a horror is going to be great because it's Halloween and people are going to want to go and see a horror on Halloween. For audiences, conventions provide a safety net when choosing what types of films to watch for particular reasons. So someone wanting to be scared will turn to a horror, but someone may turn to comedy when they want something light and to be uplifted. Okay? So again, it's a fairly straightforward thing to get your head around. The idea that genre conventions essentially are used for people to go and make stuff and know what guidelines and boundaries to work within. For film studios, it minimizes the fact that that film might lose money, and for audiences, we know what's safe, we know where we want to go to. If we know that we don't like a horror film, we're not going to go and watch a horror film, okay? Um, Now, again, this is talking generally. So, um, I think one thing to sort of stray away from a little bit is thinking that just because we're going over questions that were on last year's paper, that none of this is helpful for this year's paper. Now, I think once you've got in your head what a genre convention is, it's more power to you, subject terminology wise, to include that in an answer. It might be that you get a question this year talking about a key character in your film, and you talk about Ferris Bueller, and you say, well, he's a key character in this film because it's a teen film, and therefore he is a genre convention within himself. Okay, so it's making sure that you can get the terms in as well ultimately. So hopefully that makes sense. And be careful of these tricky talk generally questions because when you're in the rush of an exam, when you're in the stress, when you're thinking really, really quickly, you might naturally want to pin it to the film that you're talking about. But this is where you'll trip up a little bit when the exam specifically says briefly outline why filmmakers use genre conventions, unless they say in the film that you have studied, talk generally. Okay. So, last one for this second question. So, explore how genre conventions are used in the film that you've studied. So, this is where you can talk about the film that you studied. So, split your 10 markers into two and then bring in duality. This is something that, coming to the end of my first A level class, this is something that I've been talking to them about a lot. The idea of duality, not just being a Slipknot song, but talking about something expected, talking about something unexpected. Okay, because what that naturally does is it shows your confidence, the confidence that you have in your ability to talk about the things that you want to talk about, and what I like to refer to as cine literacy. This idea that if you're studying a film and it does something that you expect it to do in terms of horror, in terms of genre, whatever it is, then that's fine. You mention that and you say that that's expected. If it does something slightly different, you talk about it as well. Okay, you talk about the fact that it subverts expectations. That is a really mature conversation to have, and that's something that I'm going to show you how to do now. So, in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, genre conventions are used to adhere to and subvert audience expectations. Okay, so that's how I'm splitting this into two. This genre conventions questions used to adhere to and subvert. Okay, adhere to basically meaning, yep, stick to it, good, it's fine. Subvert being we're going to flip it on its head and we're going to shock the audience essentially. So what I've done purposely for this one is I've not given you the paragraph talking about how it adheres to it because that's quite a straightforward answer. Okay, I've given you the one to talk about how it subverts it. So, thinking purely about Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So, the second point I will discuss is the sidekick character of Cameron and how the film's focus on him is a subversion of a standard genre convention. This is best seen when Cameron delivers a monologue venting his frustrations towards his father. This is important because teen comedies usually focus on the confident main character, but this scene gives Cameron more screen time and shows his emotions instead. As an audience, we begin to feel sympathy for Cameron and see him as more important than just a background character. Genre or context. Now, this is essentially where you're squeezing a lot in to talk about how it subverts it. This subverts the teen comedy genre because sidekick characters are normally used for humour, but Cameron is shown seriously, reflecting the idea that in 1980s films about teenagers dealing with real emotional issues and John Hughes providing a voice to teenagers or providing teenagers with a voice. Okay, so that's how it subverts it because typically he's a side character. We shouldn't really get a really key important film about a side character, but this film does it. So it flips it on its head. That's the genre conventions. So, if we're going down predictions, and again, shooting myself in the foot if I say anything, blah 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 blah. So, um, I would go two ways on this. You could get a character question, but I also think you could get a character question for the first question. Cinematography would be another one to look at because again, it's not come up since 2023 on this paper. Editing's never been asked. Now, the editing question that came up for question one a couple of years ago was explore how explore how two elements of cinematography and or editing were used in your film, which naturally, for the sort of split your 10 markers into two mantra, allows you to do because you get a paragraph on cinematography, you get a paragraph on editing. Um, Being as they've never asked that before, it could come up here because they've never asked it for this film before because editing's never been asked for this film before. So you could get a blend of the two. You could get a blend of cinematography and for editing. But again, I'm not a betting person. I'm not going to say yes or no and blah, 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 blah. But, there you go. We'll see. Also, just to mention, because I didn't mention it on the last one, what you can see on the screen now is essentially my idea of how you would split this into two for all the past questions that have come up. So if you are going through past exam papers, which is going to be incredibly useful this time of year, and you maybe get to a 2021 paper and you're thinking, how the bloody hell am I supposed to split that into two paragraphs? This would be how you do it. Okay, or this would be an idea of how you do it. So just a little bit of a helping hand for you there. So, question three, the biggie, the one that people like to answer. I don't know, the one that people like to skip. My advice to you, straight off the bat, and I'm sure all the teachers around the country who are doing the same and prepping their students for the same are going to say the same thing. Never ever skip a question. Okay. Ultimately, examiners are there to reward. They are there to try and give you marks for the things that you've put down on paper. If you don't put something down on paper, they can't give you marks for it. So make sure, please, please, please make sure that you are answering every single question. Even if, and as a lot of students say to me, but I feel like I'm waffling, waffle away. Okay? Waffle away. It's someone else's job. They get paid for it. Someone else's job to mark that question, to mark your waffle, and ultimately to give you marks. And they'd sooner do that than give you nothing. Okay? So, this question, comparative analysis. Now, typically, this one has been looking around characters and it's been looking around contexts. Okay. Now, contexts is something that is really, really important for you to understand why a film was made and the things that the film is trying to reflect in its narrative, the storylines that it's put in its narrative, and it's trying to do a bit of a social commentary on different things. Now, context might come up in different ways and the wording of it might be different in that I think the 2019 one was very explicit and just said discuss the context of your film, whereas 2020, as you can see on the screen, said how does it represent the times in which it was set, and then 2023 said the time of production. My bold prediction for this, and again, I don't really want to sort of pin a flag to a mast. I've used that a lot recently, and I think it's wrong. But I think this is going to be a context question this year. They used character in 2024 and they used gender in 2025. I think you need to be ready to talk about context this year. But I would say that anyway, because a lot of the things that are going to come up for this question and something that I'll take you through in a second, you can talk about the context anyway. You can talk about the context in relation to the representation of gender. You can talk about the context in relation to the representation of a key character, because ultimately everything is influenced by the contexts. So the way that a character acts in a film is only going to be influenced by the context in which the film is set. So it's having that in the back of your mind, okay? Having the key things in the back of your mind. So straight off the bat, for Ferris Bueller and for Rebel Without a Cause, Rebel was made in the 50s at a time when parents didn't know how to treat their kids. They didn't know how to deal with their students because you had these wartime families and these wartime parents where dad went off to fight in the war and he can't relate to his son because he didn't really raise him, mum raised him. Mum's taken a bit of a leadership role in the household, so the what do you call it? The balance in the household is massively off and it's different. And because of this, around about this time, it was teenagers who were spending money. It was teenagers who they were getting disposable income from the parents. So fashion, music, film, everything like that was all being aimed and chucked at these teenagers. You then fast forward to the 80s in America, and families are better. They like each other now, okay? But the disposable income thing's still happening because in the 80s in America, we're going through an economic boom. Everyone's got money. So that's why in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the first shot you see, big establishing shot, huge house, three cars parked outside. Conversations are getting Ferris a car. What household do you know in modern day society that's got four cars outside of it? Okay, so there's a lot of things going on, and in that means that Ferris is spoiled and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on context wise that is really interesting to look at. Like Lost Boys, just off the top of my head because I've never taught it, but I love the film. There's a lot of stuff about the New Romantics going around at the time, so big pop culture influence of bands like Duran Duran and stuff like that. That comes up in the Lost Boys a little bit, but yeah. Anyway, I'm sure that your teachers have taught you this kind of stuff, so you know all that anyway. This is more to do with the questions on the papers. So this question, 20 marker, compare the representations of gender in the films that you've studied. Now, this is a little bit from the mark scheme, just to make sure that we reference it. So you must discuss both films, okay? I mark a lot of my own class's work. You're talking like early mocks, November of last year, where someone's got to this question and they've maybe just spoke about Rebel or they've maybe just spoke about Ferris. If you do that, you immediately get capped at the top of band three, which gets you 12 marks. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get 12 marks for that response because it depends on how good that response is. But you can't get any more than 12 because you need to talk about both films. You are not going to be troubling 13 marks or higher unless you talk about both films. If you only discuss one film, maximum marks actually, even though I said 12, are actually only going to be 10. Band 4 and 5 responses, so the top end, so you're good and you're excellent, are more likely for this question in particular going to cover more than just one representation of male and female. Okay, so it might be that you discuss the male representation of Jim in Rebel and Jim's dad in Rebel, and you do Ferris and Ferris Bueller and Cameron and Ferris Bueller. Okay, you bring in multiple points in order to get those really high marks. Now, the structure for this is slightly different, and I do this mainly based on trying to make sure that you write enough to get the marks for this. So, for comparative analysis, you want to do film one, film two, compare, contrast, conclude. Okay, so then at that point, you're doing about 4.5 paragraphs. Your conclusion only needs to be a sentence or two. But film one, film two, compare, contrast, conclude. Okay. Now, so this would be Rebel, Ferris, compare, contrast, conclude. Dracula, Lost Boys, compare, contrast, conclude. Okay. Now, when I say compare, I mean talk about how the films are similar. So say what they do in terms of the gender representations that are similar, and then in your contrast, say how they are different. And then at that point, you are naturally hitting the marks. You are hitting that need for this question to make sure that you bring both films together and you discuss both films together. I'm going to show you a model answer. Now, this is a model answer that uses that structure, okay? So, in Rebel Without a Cause and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, gender is represented through male characters who are given more narrative focus, while female characters are shown in more supporting roles. Key sequence I'll discuss from Rebel is the planetarium and the final observatory scenes, and the final key sequence from Ferris Bueller is the scene where Cameron destroys the Ferrari. In Rebel, so this is your first paragraph, Rebel, the first two things are your sort of topic sentences and your key sequence, mentioning your key sequence. So in Rebel, gender is best seen through Jim Stark's emotional struggles and his role as the central male character. Jim is shown as conflicted and sensitive, especially in scenes where he argues with his parents and tries to protect Plato. This challenges traditional ideas of masculinity in the 1950s, as Jim is more emotional rather than dominant. However, female characters such as Judy are often placed in a supporting role, mainly reacting to Jim and reinforcing his importance in the narrative. So that's your film one paragraph. In Ferris Bueller's Day Off, gender is represented through Cameron, who contrasts with Ferris's confident masculinity. Cameron is passive, anxious, and emotionally vulnerable, particularly in the scene after the Ferrari's damage, where the focus shifts entirely to his feelings. This subverts expectations of male characters in certain teen films by presenting a male character who lacks control and authority. Sloan, like Judy in Rebel, largely support the male characters rather than driving the storyline herself. Both films are similar because they focus heavily on male characters and represent masculinity as something that is unstable or in crisis. In both cases, male characters struggle emotionally, suggesting that teenage boys are confused or pressured by expectations. However, the films are different because Rebel Without Cause treats masculinity as more of a serious social issue, often linked to society and family, while Ferris Bueller's Day Off represents male insecurity in a more comedic and light-hearted way. Additionally, Ferris gives more importance to a side character like Cameron, which is less common in Rebel. Overall, both films represent gender through a focus on male experiences and emotions, but they reflect different social attitudes, etc. You can see it on the screen. Now, if I'm being totally honest with you, that was a response that was written by a student 2 years ago, and I didn't give that 20 marks. This was in a mock exam. I didn't give it 20 marks. I gave them 16, I think, which you might look at and you might think is a bit harsh. My issue with it is that I would have liked them to have written more about the representation of females. Because, yes, the question is asking you to talk about the representation of gender. I feel like it could have done with a little bit more balance on that. Now, there are probably teachers out there, there might even be the odd examiner out there that's looking at this and thinking, maybe you've been a bit harsh and you could have given them perhaps even full marks. Maybe you have been a bit generous at that point and done that. The way that I mark and the way that I tend to look at things, especially early on, because if this was a November mock and we still had a couple more mock series to go, I would be looking at this in not in necessarily in terms of what they did wrong, but the other things that they could add in to really strengthen that answer and to make sure that a 20 for this question is a definitive 20 rather than anything else. So yeah, if I have been harsh, I do apologise. But I do it to get the best out of them all. So last question, almost. Key development timeline. Now, this is the one that my students, for whatever reason, fret about the most, and they're like, "Oh, when was widescreen? When was this?" Apologies, exam board, if you're listening, paying attention. This is only worth 5 marks. Now, 5 marks can be the difference between a grade. They really can be. But do not stress yourselves out making sure that you 100% know in and out and backwards this compared to the other questions that are on the paper. Okay. This is just a little bit of historical recall that is needed for an exam. And if you know it, great. If you've got it in the back, great. But if you are worrying about it and you're thinking, oh, I can't remember every little bit of this timeline, my concern really would be making sure that you've got enough in your head for that 20-mark response or that 15-mark response. Now that might be bad advice, and apologies to teachers if you think that, but for me, I think it's the least priority thing on the paper. If we're looking at ones that might come up, so of the newer ones, which is anything after 1990, so if you've been teaching this as long as I have been, the original timeline was only 10 events, and they added another six recently. Um, they've not asked a question on Toy Story or citizen filmmaking or iPhones or streaming sales, and they've never asked that poor question about handheld lightweight portable cameras. The poor sods. Um, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, I think a Toy Story question might come up this year. Why not? They've not asked it before. It might be something as simple and straightforward as which studio released it and in which year was it released. Okay. But Who knows? I thought it was going to come up last year and it didn't, and they went back to the Jazz Singer, the vertically integrated Hollywood, and the first moving images. So who knows? Okay, but again, guys, really don't fret too much about this. Yes, revise it. Okay, yes, make sure that you're remembering key dates and all that kind of stuff. But please, please, please don't let this be the be all and the end all around about how much you're stressing about this exam. Okay, there are bigger things that should be a priority for this exam and this paper, and this isn't it. Okay. Um, Finally, question five, your specialist writing. Okay, so Juno, The Hurt Locker, Whiplash, Ladybird, and The Hate You Give. Now, last year's question was quite interesting. It was discuss your reaction to the specialist writing. So I'm just going to go forward to that question now. So I say discuss your reaction. Why does that say strengths and weaknesses? That was the one before. Never mind. Adam has not changed it. Apologies. So you need to know your specialist writing. Now, there are three elements of specialist writing. They are finding the frame, what makes a film independent, and then one specific to your film. Okay. Now, arguably, and I think again, or at least I hope all teachers agree with this, I prefer the one that is linked to the film. I think that's easier to sort of grasp onto. It's easier for people to hold on to. It's easier for people to relate to in terms of the film. The first one, so finding the frame, is all to do with being able to tell certain things related to cinematography and the composition of a shot. And I've put the four key ideas on the screen there. So anything and everything that is included in the composition or frame of a shot is there for a specific purpose. The framing of a shot conveys meaning through the arrangement of visual elements. A strategy to decoding the meaning of a composition or frame is to identify themes and ideas that lie at the heart of the film, and every shot counts, no matter how inconsequential it may seem. The second one is more to do with independent film. So this is independent film is something that strays artistically from the norm. Independent cinema does not need to adhere to generic patterns. The audience for independent cinema specifically takes pleasure in these disruptions of expected enjoyment to find a more subversive and oppositional position outside the norms, and challenges the cinematic form artistically and looks to create something individual in either its aesthetics, ideological viewpoint, or both. Now, they are the two sort of set ones that are there for every single film as part of this question, and then you get this additional option C, which is just for specific for each individual film. Now, I'm not going to read all this, okay? So basically, what I've put on screen are the three key points from each of the the film's specialist writing. So Juno's Get Real, White Feminism for Ladybird, Not a Black Lives Matter Movie for Here You Give, Pro Anti-War for Hurt Locker, and Whiplash being about men and masculinity. Now, last year when it comes to discussing your reaction, you could have agreed with it massively, you could have disagreed with it massively. This year, I think it's going to be a very similar worded question, but this is always one that I think is useful to go through beforehand and give yourself a bit of time to make sure that you reference answers and reference the key sequences and the key points in your answer. Because it's a 15 marker, that's why I've put the 3 points on. Because ultimately, what you want to be doing is referencing each of those points individually. I've changed the screen. I've changed the screen too early. I can't go back now, but you can go back. So yeah, so making sure that for each of your paragraphs you talk about each one of those points, and then really then at the sort of end, I would argue that what you need to be doing at that point is adding in a sentence or two to say, this is my reaction, if that's what the question's asking, whether you agree with it, whether you disagree with it, okay? Really making sure that you are discussing and engaging with the views that are raised in any one of the specialist writings, okay? It might be that you find it really easy to discuss option A, so you talk about option A. Might be B. For me, it's C. I teach my students all of them. We go through all of them, but I will admit that I put more of a focus on option C for my students because I think it's the one that is easier for them to kind of latch onto and to talk about. Okay, we're getting very close to the hour mark, which is longer than I thought it would be for this video. So hopefully that was helpful. I apologize if at times it was the rambling of a madman. If you need anything at all, put it in the comments below. Okay. I'm gonna, like I said, mentioned it before. I'm recording the paper two video right after this. I'm gonna aim to put them out at a similar time, maybe not together, but they'll both be out ahead of paper one, so you can do your revision and interleave and go back and forth between them. But leave some comments and let me know if there's anything else that you want me to do. Maybe as a sort of like quick latch on video that I can do. I'm going to try and put some more stuff on TikTok. All the stuff that's on there, I recorded a couple of years ago now. People are still finding them useful, but I know that some things probably could do with being a little bit updated. Or you might just need a quick burst of something ready before you go into the exam. So let me know. Give me some ideas. Good luck to you all. I hope it goes really, really well. Teachers as well, if there's anything extra that you think would be useful for me to do, let me know. And yeah, leave us a comment and I'll stick it up and we'll see where we go. All right. So best of luck, like I say, with everybody. Best of luck to teachers. Getting the prep ready. I'm recording this literally before we go back in for that May half term, which we all know is going to be bananas. And best of luck to all the students. You've got this, okay? Like I said before, make sure that you answer every single question. Don't leave any questions blank and revise, okay? Look over stuff that teacher's given you, look over some key sequences again, write some things down on a piece of paper, get it in your head, and it will all be absolutely fine, okay? Best of luck, and I will see you next time.